I never thought my career as a pilot would lead me to command a flying legend. My name is Victor Peterson, and after 28 years flying everything from small Cessnas to large commercial jets, I thought I'd seen it all in aviation. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day I received the call that would change my life forever. It was a cold March morning in Kiev, and I was having my morning coffee when the phone rang. On the other end of the line, a grave and urgent voice simply said, "Victor, we need you. It's about the Maria." Maria, the giant of the skies, the Antonov An-225, the world's largest aircraft. My heart immediately raced. Antonov Design Bureau had always been more than an employer to me. It was a family. I grew up in Ukraine hearing stories about the brilliant engineers who created impossible flying machines, aircraft that defied the laws of physics and showed the world what we were capable of. The An-225 Maria, which means dream in Ukrainian, was the pinnacle of that tradition. A unique aircraft on the planet weighing 285 tons empty and capable of carrying up to 250 tons of cargo. When I arrived at Antonov Airport, known as Gostomel, the atmosphere was tense. Engineers, mechanics, and officials were running back and forth with serious expressions. That's when I met Derek Williams, the operations director, a short and robust man with gray hair and penetrating eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Victor," he said, gripping my hand firmly, "we have a critical situation. An 8.2 magnitude earthquake hit the mountainous region between Pakistan and Afghanistan 18 hours ago. Entire cities have been destroyed, hospitals have collapsed, and there are at least 50,000 people who need immediate medical help." Derek led me to an operations room where weather maps covered the walls and several people were speaking simultaneously in different languages. "The United Nations contacted us directly," he continued. "They need someone capable of transporting 640 tons of medical supplies, portable hospital equipment, and a complete medical team to Islamabad in less than 24 hours. I looked at him incredulously. 640 tons, that's more than double the Maria's nominal capacity. "Exactly," he replied grimly. "It's technically possible but has never been done before. The aircraft was designed for 250 tons of payload, but engineering calculations show that, under ideal conditions and with a specific route, we can reach 640 tons for a relatively short distance." "And the weather conditions?" I asked, already imagining the answer. "That's the problem," said a female voice behind me. I turned and saw Nancy Cooper, Antonov's chief meteorologist, a woman of about 40 with blonde hair pulled back in a bun and thin-framed glasses. "There's a severe storm moving across the Black Sea and heading towards Southwest Asia. Winds up to 80 knots, severe turbulence, icing, and near-zero visibility." She showed me the weather charts on a large screen. "The ideal takeoff window is in 6 hours. If we miss this opportunity, the storm will make any flight impossible for at least 72 hours. "And the people in the earthquake?" I asked. "They don't have 72 hours, Derek replied gravely. "Medical reports indicate that without the supplies and equipment we'll transport, the mortality rate could triple. We're talking about potentially 15,000 additional lives lost." The weight of responsibility fell on my shoulders like an avalanche. I looked through the operations room window and could see the Maria on the tarmac, majestic and imposing, with its 6 Progress D-18T engines and an 88-meter wingspan. It was a sight that always left me breathless, but at that moment, it also terrified me. "Why me?" I asked. "You have more experienced pilots on the An-225. "We do," Derek admitted, "but you have something the others don't. You've flown in impossible conditions before and always brought everyone home. Remember the evacuation flight at Chernobyl in 1986? You were only 22 years old and flew an Antonov An-12 through a radioactive cloud to rescue 47 people." I remembered. How could I forget? It was the flight that taught me that aviation sometimes requires you to make decisions that go beyond standard logic and safety. Sometimes you need to fly with your heart as much as with your brain. "And there's one more thing," Derek continued. "The co-pilot assigned to this mission is Alex Peterson." My blood ran cold. Alex was my youngest son, a brilliant 26-year-old pilot who had recently graduated from the An-225 program. He was talented, brave, and stubborn, characteristics he'd inherited from me, according to his mother. "You're putting me on a suicide mission with my own son?" "Victor," Nancy said gently, "it's not a suicide mission. It's dangerous, yes, but feasible. We've done all the calculations. The AN-225 can handle it. And if it can't? Then at least we tried," Derek replied. "The alternative is to do nothing and let those people die for certain." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. In aviation, we learn early that every flight is a series of calculated risk decisions, but this was different. This wasn't just about my life or my crew's life. It was about thousands of people I would never meet, but whose survival depended on my courage and skill. "Show me the numbers," I finally said. The next 3 hours were a whirlwind of technical briefings, performance calculations, weather analyses, and route planning. The AN-225 Maria is an extraordinary aircraft, but also complex. With a length of 84 meters, height of 18 meters, and maximum takeoff weight of 640 tons, every aspect of the flight needs to be meticulously planned. Alex arrived during the performance briefing, and my heart clenched when I saw him. Tall like me, with dark hair and determined blue eyes, he walked with the characteristic confidence of young pilots. But I could see the concern in his face when he looked at the data on the screen. "Dad," he said simply, "it's an honor to fly with you." "The honor is mine, son," I replied, squeezing his shoulder. "But are you sure you want to do this?" He smiled, the same smile I used to give when someone questioned my determination. "You taught me that aviation is about serving others, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The chief flight engineer, Bob Carpenter, a 35-year veteran at Antonov, explained the technical challenges to us. "With 640 tons, we'll be operating at the aircraft's absolute limit. The center of gravity will be at the extreme margin of the approved envelope. Any cargo shift during flight could create an unrecoverable situation." "What about the engines?" Alex asked. "The 6 D-18Ts will operate at maximum continuous power for practically the entire flight," Bob replied. "Normally, we limit this regime to short periods to preserve engine life, but we have no choice." Nancy presented the detailed weather analysis. "The most direct route would take us directly through the center of the storm. That's impossible. The alternative is a longer route, skirting the storm to the south, through the Mediterranean Sea, and then northeast to Islamabad." "How much time does that add to the flight?" I asked. "Approximately 2.5 hours, she replied. "But there's a problem. With the extra weight and longer route, we'll be operating at the absolute fuel limit. There will be no alternatives if Islamabad is closed for any reason. It was an all-or-nothing situation. If we reached Islamabad and for some reason couldn't land, weather conditions, runway problems, air traffic, we wouldn't have fuel to divert to another airport." "And the crew?" I asked. "Besides you two, we'll have Jerry Davidson as flight engineer," Derek said. "He has more hours on the AN-225 than any living person, and Maria Fernandez as flight navigator." I knew both of them. Jerry was a legend at Antonov, a 58-year-old man who had participated in the original Maria project. Maria was relatively new, but had demonstrated exceptional skills in long-distance navigation. "When do we need to be ready for takeoff?" Alex asked. "In 3 hours and 40 minutes, Derek replied. "The weather window opens at 15:30 local time and remains open for only 90 minutes. The next few hours passed in a blur. While the aircraft was being loaded, Alex and I did the most detailed walk-around of our lives. The AN-225 is so large that it takes almost 45 minutes to inspect completely. We checked every panel, every antenna, every navigation light. The 6 Progress D-18T engines looked solid and ready, but I knew we'd be pushing them beyond their designed limits. The cargo was being loaded through the aircraft's enormous rear doors. Portable hospital equipment, emergency generators, medical supplies, synthetic blood, antibiotics, painkillers, portable X-ray equipment, emergency ventilators, everything packed and secured with military precision. Each item represented lives that could be saved. At 14:45, we gathered in the flight deck. The AN-225's cockpit is impressive. 5 seats, hundreds of instruments, switches, and displays. Jerry was already performing the preliminary checks, his fingers dancing over the controls with the precision of an experienced maestro. "Calculated takeoff performance," he announced. Total weight 640 tons, temperature 2 degrees Celsius, wind 320 degrees at 12 knots. Required runway 3,500 meters, available runway 3,700 meters. Margin of only 200 meters, I muttered. It's enough, Jerry said confidently. But only if everything goes perfectly. Maria presented the flight plan. Route Kiev, Sofia, Athens, Ankara, Islamabad. Total distance 4,250 kilometers. Estimated flight time 8 hours and 35 minutes. Fuel loaded 180 tons. Predicted fuel on arrival 12 tons. 12 tons. In an aircraft that burns 20 tons per hour, that represented only 36 minutes of flight. It was scary tight. At 15:15, we received clearance from the control tower. Antonov 901, taxi to runway 08. Wind 030 at 12 knots, visibility 10 kilometers, altimeter 29905. I started the engines one by one. The sound of the 6 D-18Ts coming to life is indescribable. A deep and powerful roar that you feel as much as you hear. The entire aircraft vibrated with contained energy. We taxied slowly to the runway. With 640 tons, every movement needed to be smooth and deliberate. The An-225's landing gear steering system is complex, with 32 wheels distributed across multiple bogies, and with so much weight, any sudden movement could damage the runway or the aircraft itself. Antonov 901 cleared for takeoff runway 08, wind 032 at 14 knots. Cleared for takeoff runway 08, Antonov 901, I replied. We aligned with the runway centerline. In front of me, 3,700 meters of asphalt stretched out, seeming both infinite and insufficient. Before takeoff checklist completed, Jerry announced. Mixture full rich, props full forward, throttles set, Alex said. V1185, VR195, V2205, Maria announced. I placed my hands on the throttles and looked at Alex. Ready? Ready, he replied. I pushed the throttles forward smoothly. The 6 engines responded with a deafening roar. The aircraft began to move, slowly at first, then gradually gaining speed. The weight was evident. The acceleration was noticeably slower than normal. 80 knots, Alex announced, 100 knots. V1, the decision point. From here we were committed to takeoff. VR. I pulled the yoke back gently. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. The aircraft continued rolling down the runway, reluctant to leave the ground. Then slowly, magnificently, the nose began to rise. V2, positive rate. Gear up, I ordered. The wheels retracted with a series of heavy thuds. We were flying, but barely. The climb rate was agonizingly slow, only 300 feet per minute when it would normally be 1/500. Kiev Tower, Antonov 901 airborne, requesting flight following. Antonov 901 radar contact, maintain runway heading, climb to 3,000 feet initially. It took us 15 minutes to reach 3,000 feet. It was like piloting a mountain that reluctantly agreed to fly. Maria, what's our fuel situation? I asked. Consumption slightly above predicted, she replied. The engines are working harder than calculated to maintain this altitude with this weight. At 16:30, we were crossing over Bulgaria at 28,000 feet, the maximum altitude we could reach with that weight. Normally the An-225 cruises at 35,000 feet, but today we simply didn't have enough power to climb higher. Dad, Alex said, the first weather reports from the route are coming in. The storm is intensifying faster than predicted. I looked at the weather radar. A red and yellow mass was spreading like an infection across our planned route. The storm had changed direction and speed and was now blocking our passage through the Mediterranean Sea. Maria, I need alternatives, I said. Working on it, she replied, leaning over her charts. We can try to go around to the north, through the Balkans and Turkey, but that adds another 400 kilometers. And fuel? With current consumption, we'd arrive in Islamabad with maybe 5 tons. 15 minutes of reserve. 15 minutes, it was practically nothing. But the people in the earthquake zone didn't even have that. At 17:45, we were flying over the Aegean Sea when the first sign of trouble appeared. A yellow warning light lit up on the panel. Problem with engine number 4. Jerry, status on engine 4, I ordered. Oil temperature elevated, he reported. reported after checking the instruments. Still within operational limits, but rising. How much time do we have? Hard to say. It might stabilize or it could fail completely within an hour. Losing an engine wouldn't necessarily be catastrophic. The An-225 can fly on 5 engines. But with this weight and this distance, every engine was critical. Athens Control, Antonov 9901 requesting direct routing to Ankara due to weather. Antonov 9901 approved direct Ankara. Be advised, there are reports of severe turbulence ahead at your altitude. As if responding to the air traffic controller's warning, the aircraft began to rock gently. Within minutes, we were in moderate turbulence, which quickly intensified to severe. With 640 tons, turbulence affects the An-225 differently than a smaller aircraft. Instead of shaking quickly, the entire aircraft moves like a giant ship in rough seas, rising and falling in long, powerful movements. But the structural stress is immense. Reduce speed to maneuvering speed, I ordered. Already there, Alex replied. 285 knots indicated. A particularly violent gust threw the aircraft downward in a movement that made my stomach rise to my throat. I looked at the altimeter. We had lost 800 feet instantly. Maria, what's our position relative to the main storm? We're still on the periphery, she replied, her voice tense. The center is 50 miles to the north. If we were just on the periphery, and the turbulence was already this intense, I didn't want to imagine what the center of the storm would be like. At 1920, we crossed the Turkish coast. The storm had forced us to fly 200 miles more than planned, and engine number 4 continued showing elevated temperatures. Jerry, overall engine status, I asked. Engine 4 in the red margin, but stable. The other 5 operating normally, but all at maximum continuous power for 4 hours. And fuel? Maria. He passed the question. 8.5 tons remaining, she replied. Based on current consumption, we arrive in Islamabad with 3 tons, 10 minutes of reserve. 10 minutes, it was terrifying, but there was no alternative. We couldn't stop to refuel. There were no airports on the route capable of accommodating the fully loaded An-225. At 20:45, we were flying over eastern Turkey when we received a call that chilled my blood. Antonov, 9901, Ankara Control. Be advised, Islamabad Airport is reporting deteriorating weather conditions. Visibility dropping to 800 meters in blowing snow. 800 meters of visibility. The minimum for approach at Islamabad is 1,200 meters for an aircraft the size of the An-225. Maria, are there any alternatives near Islamabad? Lahore is 280 kilometers to the southeast, she replied. But with our current fuel, we can't make it there, I completed. Dad, Alex said softly, maybe we should consider turning back. Where to? I asked. We don't have fuel to return. Our only option is Islamabad. Even if we can't land? It was the question we were all thinking, but no one wanted to ask. If we reached Islamabad and couldn't land due to weather conditions, we wouldn't have fuel to try again or go somewhere else. We'll get there and assess the situation, I said. We have 2 hours for conditions to improve. At 21:30, we crossed the border into Pakistan. Engine number 4 had stabilized, but still operated in the red margin. The turbulence had decreased, but now we faced a new challenge. Flying through mountains up to 25,000 feet altitude with an aircraft that could barely maintain 28,000 feet. Terrain ahead, announced the ground proximity warning system. I have the terrain on visual, Alex replied, looking through the windscreen. The Hindu Kush mountains stretched below us like giant teeth, their snow-covered peaks glowing under the moon. 3,000-foot margin, Maria announced, but there are higher peaks ahead. Can we climb higher? I asked Jerry. Negative. The engines are at maximum. This is our ceiling altitude. We flew through valleys between mountains, following a serpentine route that Maria had plotted through the lower peaks. It was a flight that required total concentration. A navigation error of a few degrees could take us directly into a mountain. At 22:15, Maria announced Islamabad, 150 miles. Estimated descent in 20 minutes. Remaining fuel? 5 tons. 5 tons. Less than 15 minutes of flight. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it over the engine noise. Islamabad approach, Antonov 991, 150 miles northeast, requesting current weather. Antonov 991 Islamabad approach, current weather, wind 090 at 25 knots gusting to 40, visibility 600 meters in blowing snow, ceiling 400 feet broken, temperature -8 Celsius. 600 meters of visibility, half the required minimum, and with 40-knot crosswinds. Maria, is there any forecast for improvement? The next weather observation is in 30 minutes, she replied. But the trends aren't good. We flew in silence for a few minutes, each of us processing the situation. We had fuel for one approach attempt, maybe two if we were extremely conservative. If we couldn't land... Dad, Alex said, you always told me that in aviation, sometimes we have to make decisions based not just on what's safe, but on what's right. I looked at him, amazed by his maturity. And what do you think is right? Try, he replied simply. Those people need what we're carrying. If we don't try... Jerry, Maria, opinions, I asked. The aircraft can handle it, Jerry said. It's at the limits, but it can handle it. I have an approach route that might work, Maria added. If we can break through the clouds and get visual on the runway. Islamabad approach, Antonov 991 requesting approach clearance. Antonov 991, are you aware of current weather conditions? They are below published minimums for your aircraft category. Affirmative approach. We are declaring an emergency due to fuel state and humanitarian nature of cargo. Requesting immediate vectors for ILS approach runway 12. Understood, Antonov. Emergency declared. Vector heading 270, descend to 12,000 feet. You are cleared for ILS approach runway 12. Be advised, wind is 090 at 28 knots gusting to 42. That was close to the M225's maximum demonstrated wind, especially at this point. We began the descent. With 5 tons of fuel remaining, every minute counted. I had to make this approach work on the first try. Localizer captured, Alex announced at 23:05. Glide slope captured, I confirmed. Before landing checklist, I ordered. Jerry executed the checklist quickly. Landing gear down and locked. Flaps full, fuel pumps on, anti-ice on. 2,000 feet above minimums, Maria announced. We flew the instrument approach, relying completely on the navigation systems. Outside the cockpit, everything was darkness and snow. 1,000 feet above minimums, 500 feet above minimums. Minimums! I looked outside and saw only snow and darkness. There was no visual of the runway. Continue, I ordered. Technically, I should have initiated a missed approach procedure, but with our fuel, that would mean certain death. 100 feet below minimums, 200 feet below minimums. Then, like a miracle, the runway lights appeared through the snow like diamonds in the dark. Runway in sight, Alex shouted. Continue visual, I replied. But the wind was pushing me off the center line. With 42 knots of crosswind, I had to maintain a significant drift correction, essentially flying the aircraft sideways to maintain alignment with the runway. 50 feet, 40 feet, 30 feet. At the last moment, I executed a maneuver called the wing-low technique, lowering the right wing to compensate for the crosswind and aligning the aircraft with the runway at the last second. 20 feet, 10 feet. The wheels touched the asphalt with a heavy but controlled thud. With 640 tons, and 225 landings are never smooth, but it was one of the best I'd ever made. Reverse thrust, I ordered. The engine reversers opened with a deafening roar, helping to decelerate the giant aircraft. I applied the brakes gradually. With this weight, excessive braking could blow the tires or damage the brake system. Speed brake deployed, Alex announced. Slowly, magnificently, the aircraft decelerated and finally stopped. Islamabad Tower. Antonov 991 down and stopped. Runway 12. Antonov 991, welcome to Islamabad. Emergency vehicles are standing by. Taxi to cargo ramp when ready. I shut down the engines one by one. The silence that followed was deafening after 8 hours and 40 minutes of constant engine roar. Remaining fuel? I asked Maria. 1.2 tons, she replied. 4 minutes of flight. 4 minutes. We had arrived with 4 minutes of fuel remaining. I looked at my crew, Alex with tears in his eyes, Jerry smiling for the first time in hours. Maria hugging her navigation charts. We had done the impossible. When we exited the aircraft, a crowd was waiting for us. Pakistani government officials, United Nations representatives, medical teams, journalists. But what touched me most deeply were the local volunteers who immediately began unloading the cargo, knowing that every minute saved could mean lives preserved. Dr. Ahmad Hassan, medical coordinator of the rescue mission, shook my hand with tears in his eyes. "Captain Peterson," he said, "you just saved thousands of lives. This equipment and these supplies will make the difference between life and death for so many people." 3 days later, we received the final report. The medical supplies we transported allowed the establishment of 3 field hospitals that treated more than 8,000 injured. The generators we carried provided power for emergency surgeries that saved hundreds of lives. The synthetic blood and antibiotics prevented disease outbreaks that could have killed thousands. When we returned to Kiev, we were received as heroes. But for me, the real reward was the hug I received from Alex the moment we exited the aircraft in Islamabad. "Dad," he had said, "now I understand why you always said that flying isn't just about machines. It's about people." 3 weeks after our mission, we received a letter from a 12-year-old girl named Fatima from one of the cities affected by the earthquake. She had been injured when her school collapsed, but was saved thanks to the medical equipment we transported. In the letter, written in hesitant English, she simply said, "Thank you for bringing hope flying through the clouds." That mission taught me that aviation, in its essence, isn't about flying aircraft. It's about connecting people, about bringing hope where it's needed, even when the odds seem impossible. The Antonov An-225 Mriya, the dream, isn't just an incredible machine. It's a symbol of what we can achieve when we combine brilliant engineering with human courage. Today, whenever I see the Mriya on the tarmac at Gostomel, I remember that night over the mountains of Pakistan, flying with just 4 minutes of fuel, carrying 640 tons of hope through a storm. I remember why I became a pilot, and why, even after 28 years, I still love to fly. Aviation isn't just about getting from point A to point B. Sometimes it's about flying to places where hope needs to arrive before anything else. And sometimes, just sometimes, we manage to be the messengers of that hope, piloting through storms and impossibilities to remind the world that dreams really can fly. Every time I enter the cockpit now, I carry with me the memory of those final 4 tons of fuel and those 8,000 lives we were able to touch. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how big or powerful the aircraft you pilot is. What really matters is what you carry inside it and why you choose to fly. Today, when young pilots ask me about a career in aviation, I always tell this story, not to scare them, but to remind them that flying is a privilege and a responsibility, that sometimes we'll be called to do the impossible, and when that moment comes, we need to be ready not just technically, but also emotionally and morally. The An-225 Mriya continues flying today, carrying cargo around the world. But for me, it will always be the aircraft that taught me that the greatest flights aren't measured in distance or altitude, but in the difference we make in the lives of people we'll never meet, but who depend on our courage to fly when no one else can. And when I look at Alex today, now an experienced captain on the An-225 itself, I see that he carries that lesson with him. I see that he understands that every flight is an opportunity to serve, and that the true measure of a pilot isn't in how many hours he has, but in how many lives he can touch through his skill and determination. Aviation has given me many things over the years: adventure, challenges, camaraderie. But that night over the mountains of Pakistan, flying with my son beside me and 640 tons of hope in our cargo, it gave me something even more precious: the certainty that I chose the right profession, that I dedicated my life to something that really matters. And when someone asks me if I would do it all again, knowing the risks, knowing the fear I felt in those final moments of the approach, my answer is always the same: yes, without hesitation. Because there are moments in life when you're called to make a difference, and when that moment comes, you need to have the courage to respond. The Antonov An-225 Mriya may be the world's largest aircraft, but that night, it became something more. It became a symbol that there's no obstacle too big, no storm too severe, no challenge too impossible, when you have the right motivation, saving lives and bringing hope where it's most needed. And that's why even after all these years, I still wake up every morning eager to fly. Because I never know when I'll receive that call, when someone will say, "We need you, it's about the Maria." And when that day comes, I'll be ready. We'll all be ready. Because that's our responsibility as pilots, as aviators, as human beings, to always be ready to fly when the world needs us. If you enjoyed this story of courage, determination, and the power of flying dreams, subscribe to Black Box so you won't miss the next tale from the skies. Leave in the comments what aviation story you'd like to hear next, and share this video with other aviation lovers. Because the best stories are those that inspire us to reach the impossible, one takeoff at a time.